What's up, guys? This is Leviathan Kraken here. I've been doing a lot of thinking about the most hated creature in all of Subnautica. I hate it with a passion, and I believe we all do. Yes, the dreaded Crashfish. Annoying as they may be, they spark a great deal of curiosity in my mind. Like the obvious, how could a creature evolve to just blow itself up? I mean, really. Has evolution given this fish the short end of the stick? Why are they so determined to protect this sulfur plant? And is there something more that meets the eye here? I simply cannot accept that they live only to explode and die defending their territory. There has to be more to this. So let's dig deeper. I'm going to talk about several different theories here and give a brief science lesson that will explain how they actually explode. First of all, what is the Crashfish? And what was this creature inspired from? We're going to analyze different categories of the databank entry. Here it says, their appearance. The Crashfish is an oval-shaped fish with widely spaced nostrils, a wide, seemingly toothless mouth, and one pale yellow eye with a large black pupil. The top of its body is red and scaly and looks like dripped on. Its underside and face are covered by smooth, cream-colored skin. Many spikes protrude outwards from the crashfish's body. These spikes are beige in color, tipped with red, and are responsible for triggering their characteristic explosive chemical reaction. The same spikes make up its fins, though these are much more brightly colored than the spikes found elsewhere on the body. So, we can clearly see here that the crashfish was inspired from what we have on Earth, the pufferfish. You can see the round balloon-like bodies and the spikes all over his body. Another bit of inspiration I believe the devs had was the Caco Demon from the game Doom. You can see the red balloon-like shape, one eye in the middle, and lots of similar spikes. I felt it was also important to mention that the Caco Demon was inspired from the Astral Dreadnought from Dungeons & Dragons. And on top of all of that, it is mentioned here on the Subnautica wiki page that the Crashfish idea was drawn from the classic naval contact mines. When a ship's hull would collide with one of its spikes, the casing would be crushed and cause it to explode. So yeah, you've come a long way, little guy. So now, let's talk about the crystallized sulfur we see inside the plant in Subnautica. I had to do quite a bit of research on this topic, and I have to admit, I learned a lot, and these fun little research projects are very rewarding. Now, the last part of the PDA entrance here says here, the sulfur plant has evolved to feed on sulfuric compounds secreted by the crashfish, which makes its nest within its leaves. Stronger, more protected plants provide superior nesting grounds, which in turn provide the plant with more nutrients from crashfish. The defensive mechanism, concentrations of sulfur build up in the organism over time. If the crashfish collides with something at sufficient speed, the spikes on its torso are impacted, triggering an explosive chemical reaction. So, before we can completely understand this, we need to know what sulfur is. Sulfur is the 10th most common element in our universe, and the 5th most common on Earth. Sulfur can be found in its native form as yellow mineral or even crystallized, usually in places like hot springs and volcanic vents. But we mostly see it used and found as sulfide and sulfate minerals, which are salts from the sulfuric acid. Almost all of our sulfur is produced as a byproduct of removal from natural gas and petroleum. So we know that sulfur is a flammable solid that ignites at low temperatures. Just the dust alone ignites easily in close spaces, and grinding it can produce explosions. Even the Bible references sulfur as brimstone for its flammable qualities. We see flammable examples of sulfur being used today in things such as coal, black powder, explosives, and matches, just to name a few. So how would the Crashfish explode though? I mean, he is underwater, right? Well, I did find some information that explains how sulfur may form an ignitable vapor air mixture in closed tanks or containers inside of his body. Any kind of agitation to this gas could generate an electrostatic charge. And boom, goodbye Crashfish. Did you also notice how your oxygen level drops when the fish explodes on contact with the player? Well, that's because burning sulfur can release something called sulfur dioxide. Sulfur dioxide is a toxic and suffocating gas that can cause severe lung damage and even death. Sulfur trioxide is also released, and when mixed with water, can become sulfuric acid, which can be very corrosive. This also produces a lot of heat and can cause chemical burns as well. The effects are much less severe, of course, since you're swimming around in the ocean, but that's still a bit of extra pain your character faces against one of these evil fish. So, where is all this sulfur coming from, you might wonder? It builds up in his body, as mentioned in the PDA, but it turns out that sulfur is actually metabolized by all organisms and is the 8th most abundant element in humans, mostly found in proteins. In fact, sulfur is one of the main chemical elements needed for biochemical functioning and is an elemental macronutrient for all living organisms, even bacteria. Plants especially need this mineral, some more than others, but sulfate minerals are very common in fertilizers. Sulfur is in feces as well, so the crashfish poops it out and the plant benefits in this way. How exactly a crystallized pure form of sulfur is located inside the plant in Subnautica, I don't know. It is my guess that the crashfish somehow poops out sulfur in this hardened form. So this brings us to the final part of the video. My theories. Well, at first, my theory was that what if the databank entry was wrong and the crashfish could be a flora and not a fauna? Yes, not a fish at all, but in fact an aggressive seed like a homing missile sent out by the plant to attack predators and protect itself and maybe even spread more of the plant's seeds in the process of the explosion. It made sense to me, but after examining the databank entry, I quickly debunked this. Yes, the crashfish is specifically called a fauna in the databank, but even if that could be wrong, how could it possibly be hatched from an egg? I mean, it most definitely can't be a plant. It is described as a symbiotic relationship in the entry, so that means it is a separate entity. I won't argue with the databank any further. My next theory is that what if the crashfish that attacks you are only the males of the species? Maybe they are extremely territorial, and when they explode, it is actually a part of their mating process. They could be releasing millions of sperm into the water that find their way back to the females that just remain in hiding. There are plenty of examples of male species that died during the mating process here on Earth, such as the male anglerfish or praying mantis. And my last theory here is that perhaps the plant itself has influenced the crashfish's evolution and behavioral patterns for its own benefit. We know the databank entry says that they have a symbiotic relationship, but the question is what kind? You see, there are 3 different types of symbiotic relationships. First one you have is called mutualism, meaning that both animals mutually benefit. The most common example of this is the clownfish, clinging the sea anemone's tentacles, acting as bait to lure in other fish while receiving protection from the stinging anemone in which it is immune to. Second is called commensalism, where one species benefits while the other gets literally nothing, like tree frogs, for example, using plants as protection. And finally, parasitism, where one benefits but the other suffers. An example would be fleas and ticks. Ugh. Could this in fact be a parasitic relationship? The crashfish seems to get nothing by dying. Let's look at an example of the fungus known as Cordyceps unilaterus fungus. This fungus, found in tropical regions, infects ants through spores and actually changes its behavior. Through fungal mind control, the ant leaves its nest for a more humid area that helps the fungus grow better. It then ascends to somewhere about 10 inches off the ground, sinks its jaws into a leaf, and waits for death. Once the fungus has completely devoured its victim, it sends more spores out through the ant's head to infect other ants. Could the sulfur plant have found a way to manipulate the chemical makeup of the first crashfish that entered its domain? Could the crashfish unknowingly be spreading more plants, spores, while not even knowing that he's about to explode? Another thing worth mentioning is that the crashfish does not explode in the alien containment, but they do if you take them out and use them with a propulsion cannon, which kind of confuses me a little. I was hoping that without the plants somehow they wouldn't explode, but I believe this is just game mechanics to be able to see them swimming around in your tank. Unfortunately, they do explode either way, and nothing could change that except hopefully further evolution. Do you agree with any of my theories? Are the crashfish doomed to extinction? Did I get my science right? Let me know in the comments, and leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed this. Peace.